B. The night my neighbour revealed a shocking truth. What happened next was unbelievable. It was a quiet, peaceful night, the kind that makes the whole world feel still. Everything outside seemed asleep, and I was curled up on my couch, a book in my hand, though I wasn't really reading. My mind kept drifting back to something that had happened earlier that day, something I couldn't stop thinking about. My name is Claire. I'm 48, and I've lived in this neighbourhood almost my whole life, in the same house my parents once owned. It's a simple, calm place, nothing flashy but full of memories. I used to think life here would always stay the same, but life has a funny way of surprising you when you least expect it. My neighbour Samuel has lived next door for years. We weren't close, but we always exchanged waves and short conversations over the fence. He's older than me, probably in his mid-60s. He's quiet, keeps to himself, but he's always seemed like the kind of person you could count on if you ever needed help. I never imagined that one evening would change everything I thought I knew about him, and even about myself. That night started out like any other. I had just finished dinner and was cleaning up when I saw Samuel standing at the edge of his driveway. He looked like he was trying to decide whether or not to come over. I was curious, so I stepped outside. "Hey, Samuel," I said with a smile. The sun had just set. "Claire," he said, sounding unsure, "would it be okay if I came by for a minute?" "Of course," I said. "Come on in." I moved aside to let him in, wondering why he seemed so serious. Samuel didn't usually visit people, but now he was standing in my cozy living room, nervously fidgeting with his hands. Something was clearly on his mind. He cleared his throat, his eyes darting around the room before finally landing on me. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said. "There's something I've kept hidden, something I've never told anyone." My heart started to race. I had never seen Samuel look so unsettled. "Of course," I said, trying to make him feel comfortable. "What's going on?" He shifted his weight nervously before meeting my eyes. "This might surprise you, Claire, but I've known you longer than you think." I raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I used to live in this house before your parents did." Confusion washed over me. "You lived here before my family bought it?" He nodded slowly. "Yes, I grew up in this house just like you did." I was stunned. I had never heard anything about this. This home was more than just a house. It was a piece of my family's history. How could I have missed something so big? Samuel seemed to sense my shock, but he continued. "There's a reason I never said anything," he said. "Not to your parents, not to anyone. I kept quiet for a reason." He paused, as if he were preparing to let go of something heavy he had carried for years. "Claire, this house meant everything to me, not just because it was where I grew up, but because of someone who lived here." I leaned in, sensing that what he was about to say would change everything. "What do you mean?" He lowered his voice to barely a whisper. "Your mother, I loved her. Deeply." The words hung in the air, shocking and heavy. I felt a knot form in my stomach. My mother had been gone for years, and never once had I heard anything like this. He continued, his eyes full of a sadness I'd never seen in him before. "She was the love of my life, Claire. She meant everything to me." "I never told her how I felt," Samuel said softly. "I was too afraid. I kept it inside for years, and by the time I realized what I'd lost, it was already too late." A wave of emotion stirred in me, surprise, confusion, and something I couldn't quite name. Samuel was no longer just the quiet neighbour next door. He was someone who had carried a hidden love and a deep regret for most of his life. I sat there, silent for a long time. The man I had once waved to over the fence now seemed like someone completely different. Someone shaped by heartbreak and memories I knew nothing about. I had never seen this side of him before. Finally, I found the words. "I had no idea." He nodded slowly, looking right at me. "I know, I didn't expect you to. But I couldn't keep it in any longer. I needed to say it out loud, especially after all these years, with both of us still living here. His expression was a mix of sadness and relief, like he had just set down a heavy burden. And in that moment, I saw a part of him that was raw and honest. Something real. I felt a deep empathy rising inside me. For a second, it felt like we understood each other without needing to say anything. We were more than neighbours now. We were two people connected by a shared history, even if it had remained hidden until now. As I sat in that quiet moment, the weight of everything hit me. This secret, this truth about my mother and the man next door, had changed something inside me. One thing was clear: nothing would ever be the same again. Samuel had finally opened up about the pain he had carried alone for decades. And though it left me shaken, it also revealed something powerful about love, about loss, and about how quickly life can pass us by. The night was still and heavy around us, and I couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of something new between us? Or would it pull us apart? Whatever happened next, I knew one thing for sure. This moment, this strange and intimate connection, would stay with me forever. Just as I was about to speak again, I looked into Samuel's eyes. They had softened, like he already knew what I was going to say. But instead of words, I simply nodded. We sat together in silence, understanding something that didn't need to be spoken aloud. The night felt still around us, heavy with the weight of his confession. Neither of us knew exactly what to say next, but it didn't matter. His words had created something between us, an invisible bridge of shared emotion. I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I comfort him, ask questions, or just let the silence speak for both of us? Samuel must have sensed the tension. He shifted in his seat, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. His shoulders were hunched slightly, like the years of carrying this secret had finally started to lift, but only just. "I know this might be a lot," he said quietly, breaking the silence. "It was never my goal to bring you any pain. I just felt you deserved to know. You had the right to understand what your mother meant to me." I nodded again, slower this time. My thoughts were a swirl of emotions. The idea that someone I'd always seen as a quiet neighbour had once loved my mother deeply, maybe more deeply than anyone else, was overwhelming. It wasn't that I didn't understand love. It was just that this kind of hidden, silent love was so unexpected. "I appreciate your honesty, Samuel," I said, my voice soft but unsteady. "But I'm still trying to process all of this. I had no idea she meant so much to you." He looked down, regret written all over his face. "She didn't know," he said. "Not really. I never found the right way or the right time to tell her. I kept thinking there would be more time, but there wasn't." He looked back up at me, his voice quieter now. "When she died, it wasn't just losing her that broke me. It was losing the chance to ever tell her what she truly meant to me. I've had to live with that." His words hit something deep in me. I could almost feel the weight of what he carried, as if it had somehow passed from him to me, even just for a second. My mother was bold and full of life, strong, independent, and fiercely herself. I had never imagined that someone, quietly watching from nearby, had loved her so completely and said nothing. That someone had held on to that love alone and had been left with only silence and regret. "I don't know what to say, Samuel," I whispered, my voice catching as a lump formed in my throat. "I wish I had known. I wish I had understood the depth of her love, of what she meant to others." Samuel offered a small, sorrowful smile. "There isn't much to say, really. I just needed to let it out. I've carried this with me for so long, I couldn't keep it from you any longer. Maybe it was selfish keeping it to myself, but I thought staying silent would be easier, for both of us." "I understand," I replied, my voice steadier now. "I do. But this doesn't change everything, Samuel. You're still my neighbour. You're still part of my life. That doesn't go away, no matter what's been said tonight." Relief flickered across his face. His shoulders relaxed as though a quiet burden had lifted. "I'm grateful to hear that," he said softly. "The last thing I wanted was to make things uncomfortable between us, but I couldn't keep this part of my life hidden from you forever." I stood and walked to the window, where the glow of the streetlights spread gently across the yard. I needed a moment to gather myself, to quiet the storm of thoughts swirling in my chest. The room seemed smaller now, as if the secret we'd just shared had drawn everything closer, made the air feel heavier. Samuel's voice broke the silence again, low and tender, but laced with something deeper. "Claire, there's something else. I've always admired you. Your strength, your independence, it reminds me of her. There's so much of your mother in you. Sometimes it feels like she's still here, in the way you carry yourself." I turned to face him, startled by the sincerity in his eyes. "You really think that?" I asked quietly, my voice trembling with something I couldn't quite name. I always thought I was so different from her. "I always felt like I fell short of her example," I admitted softly, my voice barely above a breath. "Especially after everything that happened." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes meeting mine with a look of deep understanding that needed no words. "Claire, your mother was a remarkable woman," he said. "But don't underestimate your own worth. She lives on in you, in more ways than you may realize. The way you carry yourself, the kindness you show others, the strength in your perspective. She would be proud of the woman you've become." A sudden wave of emotion welled up inside me, catching me off guard. Tears threatened to fall, stirred by a sorrow I hadn't realized was still quietly buried within me. The ache of losing her, of navigating the world without her unwavering presence, still echoed in my heart. Yet listening to Samuel speak of her with such warmth and reverence felt like recovering a missing piece of her, something beautiful and unseen that had been hiding in the shadows of memory. "I had no idea," I whispered, a single tear slipping down my cheek. "Thank you, Samuel. I didn't know how much I needed to hear that." He offered a gentle, understated smile, his gaze soft and sincere. "It's the truth, Claire. You don't have to become her to honor her. You already do, just by being who you are." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, not the kind of silence that presses heavy on your chest, but something softer, something suspended in the air around us, almost sacred. The weight of the past lingered, but for once, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like connection. It was a moment of quiet solace, a shared understanding steeped in all that had been revealed. The emotions between us, raw, unspoken, and deeply felt, lingered in the air like the final notes of a melody. At last, I broke the silence, my voice scarcely more than a whisper. "Thank you for sharing that with me, Samuel, truly, and I believe we'll be all right. This doesn't change the bond between us." Our history stretched far beyond the words exchanged tonight, and I sensed it still held firm. Samuel's expression softened. A quiet nod followed. "You're right, Claire. Our bond has endured many seasons, and it will remain. Finally speaking this truth aloud brings a sense of peace." I stepped closer, resting my hand gently on his arm. "I'm grateful for your trust. It means more than you know." He looked at me then, his gaze warm, honest, and stripped of pretense. After a pause, his eyes drifted toward the door. "I'll let you return to your evening," he said. "I just needed to set this down, this weight I've carried for far too long. Thank you for listening." He turned and stepped into the night. I lingered in the doorway, watching as he crossed the yard, his silhouette gradually swallowed by the quiet hush of twilight. The air had cooled, though not unpleasantly so. It was the kind of chill that came after something had shifted, something unseen but deeply felt. The world beyond seemed somehow more vivid, as if the truth we had shared had stirred the stillness itself. I closed the door softly behind me and leaned against it for a long moment, the quiet pressing gently in around me. I stood there, alone, but changed, absorbing the gravity of what had transpired, and knowing, without question, that things would never quite be the same again. Uncertainty lingered on the horizon, casting long shadows across the path of our relationship. Yet amid that ambiguity, one truth held steady in my heart. I had uncovered something essential, not just about Samuel or even about my mother, but about myself, about the nature of love, about the quiet, transformative power of those who enter our lives in the most unexpected of ways. For the first time in what felt like forever, a fragile sense of peace settled over me. The days that followed that night unfolded with a strange, almost surreal quietude. To my surprise, the air between Samuel and me was not thick with awkwardness, but charged with something gentler, a shared understanding, unspoken yet deeply felt. Our conversations became fewer, but the silence between us no longer felt empty. Instead, it held us in a calm, knowing embrace. An invisible thread had been spun between us, forged in mutual vulnerability. It wasn't just grief we had shared, it was history, memory, and a kind of fragile grace. In the stillness of the morning that followed Samuel's confession, I found myself drawn back to his words. They echoed within me, reshaping my image of my mother. A woman I had always seen as strong, impenetrable, almost invincible. Now she stood before me in memory, tender and complex. Changed. She had known a love I had never seen, never understood, until now. And though it arrived in the twilight of her story, this hidden fragment of her life felt like a gift, something I could finally hold close. In the wake of that night, I began to notice the world more acutely. Each brief encounter, every ordinary exchange, carried a new weight, an added meaning I hadn't grasped before. It was as though Samuel's revelation had cracked something open in me, revealing not just truths about the past, but a different way of seeing the present. Yet it wasn't only about my mother, it was about me. I had never fully reckoned with the emotional legacy that ran quietly through my family's veins. We had always loved each other, certainly, but often in a way that left much unsaid. We had rarely ventured into the deeper waters of emotion, the ones that tug quietly just beneath the surface. Now I could feel them stirring. Samuel had opened a door I hadn't even known existed. That afternoon, nestled in the garden with a warm cup of coffee cupped in my hands, I sat wrapped in the soft hush of late-day light, reflecting on the insights I had uncovered, not just about my mother, but about myself. Perhaps Samuel was right. Perhaps I carried more of my mother's strength and spirit than I had ever allowed myself to believe. For so long, I had measured myself against her, focusing on the formidable woman she had been, failing to see the quiet resilience I had cultivated in her absence. My strength was not a mirror of hers, it was my own. It had been shaped by grief, sharpened by solitude, and tempered by the long process of becoming. The afternoon unfolded in tranquil silence. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden veil across the garden, painting everything in a soft glow. The space, once my sanctuary, felt subtly transformed, as though it now bore witness to a deeper part of me. Leaves whispered gently overhead, and the birds offered a melodic counterpoint to the weight of unspoken truths and words that had recently passed between us. I looked up and saw Samuel standing at the gate. His expression was unreadable, quiet, uncertain. He had been subdued these past few days. Though our exchanges remained warm, there was a subtle tension between us, like a fine thread stretched tight. I couldn't tell whether it was born of what we had shared or simply the challenge of finding our footing in the aftermath. "May I join you?" he asked softly, a faint smile touching his lips. I returned the smile, giving a small nod. "Of course, come in." He stepped through the gate and approached the empty chair beside me. He paused, taking in the garden, the details, the stillness, the care etched into every bloom and branch. I could tell it wasn't lost on him. "It's peaceful here," he said, his voice reflective. "I can see why you spend so much time in this place." I inclined my head, watching him with quiet curiosity. There was something different in his presence now, something unguarded. The boundaries that had once defined the space between us seemed blurred, softened. We had crossed into unfamiliar terrain, unspoken but undeniable, and in that ambiguity there was a strange comfort. "This is where my thoughts can roam freely," I said softly. "Sometimes I need the space to let them settle, so they can find alignment with how I feel." Samuel looked at me for what felt like an eternity, his gaze warm, thoughtful. There was no rush in his eyes, only understanding. "I know what you mean," he murmured. "These past few days, I've spent a great deal of time reflecting." I waited, hoping he would go on, but instead of speaking further, he lowered himself into the seat beside me. Though his posture appeared at ease, a subtle tension clung to his movements, like something still unspoken hovered between us. The silence that fell wasn't awkward, but it carried weight. We both felt it, the press of unsaid things, the quiet pull of a conversation waiting to be born. At last, Samuel spoke again, his voice steady and clear. "I've been thinking a lot about my feelings for your mother," he said. "How I never told her what I truly felt, how I let so much time pass before I admitted it, even to myself." I nodded slowly, thoughtfully. "You've been carrying that weight for a long time, haven't you?" He exhaled, the sound barely audible. "Yes," he whispered, eyes drifting to the horizon as though it offered some unspoken absolution. "Far too long." A pause stretched between us, wide and full of meaning. "I've realised something, Claire. I've held on to that love, clung to it, for so long that it's clouded everything else. I've lived in its shadow. But I think it's time to let it go." His voice trembled slightly at the edges, not with regret, but with release. The truth of his words lingered in the quiet, and I could feel the shift within him. The weight he had carried, unseen, unshared, had finally begun to lift. "You're right," I said gently. "There comes a moment when we must lay down what no longer serves us. That doesn't diminish what it meant. It simply allows us to keep moving." Samuel gave the faintest nod, his features softening in the fading light. "Let go of the past. It no longer serves you," I said quietly. "It's unfair, to yourself and to everyone else who was part of it." Progress, I believed, came in gentle increments. "Even a single step forward," I continued, "is a step nonetheless." Samuel turned to me then, and for the first time since our paths had intertwined, there was a flicker of light in his expression. Something fragile, yet sincere. "I think I've been afraid to move forward," he admitted, his voice low. "Afraid of what that would mean, of what I'd be leaving behind." He paused, breathing deeply. "But hearing your words now, it feels like that fear has lost its grip, as if I've finally been given permission to let it go." I reached out, resting my hand gently on his arm. "It's okay to release it, Samuel, to set it down. The past will always be a part of you, but there's peace to be found here, in this moment too." A smile lifted his face, subtle but unmistakably real. It softened the edges of his features, reaching into his eyes. "Thank you, Claire," he said, his voice touched with quiet reverence. "More than you know." The air between us shifted. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It held understanding, calm, acceptance. A stillness not of hesitation, but of shared clarity. "I think," I whispered, "we've both been holding on to burdens we should have laid down long ago." He met my gaze, and I could sense the truth of it settling within him. "That doesn't mean we can't move forward," I added. "There's still room ahead of us, space for peace, for meaning, for something new." Samuel nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting thought and something like readiness. "Yes," he said at last, "I believe I'm finally ready for that." As the twilight deepened, the gentle hum of the garden began to fade into the coming night. The warmth of the day lingered in the air, and something inside me softened, eased. For the first time in a long while, I felt it, the loosening of the past's grip, and in its place, the quiet promise of beginning again. I sensed at last that I was ready to welcome whatever the future might offer, be it new connections, deeper understanding, or beginnings yet unseen. I felt open to it all. The days that followed our conversation in the garden carried a surprising lightness. Between Samuel and me, something had shifted, an unspoken agreement that honored both the weight of what we had uncovered and the promise of what might lie ahead. The heaviness of that evening's revelation seemed to lift, replaced by a quiet clarity that lingered between us like sunlight after rain. I found myself spending more time with Samuel, not out of obligation, but with a renewed sense of ease. Our conversations became effortless, free of the unspoken strain that had long underpinned our bond. The walls that had once held us apart dissolved, revealing a shared peace neither of us had expected. In the silences, in the laughter, in the simple act of being, something gentle was taking root. Amid the reflections and quiet processing of all we had uncovered, a profound respect bloomed. There was no need for declarations or reassurances, just presence, just understanding. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, I looked up to see Samuel approaching from across the way. Something about him had changed. He moved with a lightness I hadn't seen before, his usual hesitance replaced by a quiet confidence that felt both unfamiliar and deeply welcome. "Greetings," he said with a smile, his voice warm, his presence unguarded. It was simple, unremarkable even, but in that moment, it meant everything. As the sun dipped below the horizon one quiet evening, casting long golden rays across the garden, I sat beside Samuel once more. No words passed between us, none were needed. In that stillness, I felt a quiet contentment take root. Not because everything had been resolved, but because we had chosen to release the weight of what could not be changed. What remained was the present, untouched, unpromised, and infinitely open. And that, I realized, was enough. Samuel and I had reached a silent understanding. We would press onward, unencumbered by the weight of our past. We had both changed, shaped by the conversations we'd shared, the thoughtful silences between them, and the profound connection that had quietly taken root. As days melted into weeks, I felt a growing comfort in the act of release, letting go of what no longer served me, faded memories, old regrets, or ties that had run their course. A sense of liberation washed over me, like stepping into a new chapter of life, not defined by what had been, but by the possibilities I now had the power to shape. That evening, as we sat on the porch beneath a sky brushed in amber and gold, the sun sank behind the hills. Samuel turned toward me, his gaze contemplative. "You know, Claire," he began, voice soft but weighted with meaning, "I never thought I'd feel peace again, not after everything. But I believe I've found it here, in these conversations, in your presence, in this quiet understanding between us." A warmth bloomed in my chest, and a smile tugged at my lips. "It seems we've both found a kind of peace," I said, "and maybe the destination matters less than the journey itself." "The journey?" he echoed, nodding. "Yes, I think we're on the right path." As the evening air grew cool, we lingered side by side, comfortable, still. Time seemed to stretch, as if the world was offering us a moment to simply be. And in that stillness, I saw it clearly. We were no longer who we had been when this began. We had grown into deeper versions of ourselves and of each other. And that wasn't just okay. It was everything we needed. As I looked over at Samuel, it struck me how life's unexpected turns, the ones that shake our foundations, are often the ones that bring the greatest clarity. That night, when he first opened his heart, had marked a beginning far more than an end. It had transformed us. And while the road ahead remained uncertain, we were no longer afraid to take that next step, together. 29:47. In that moment, I discovered that even the most unforeseen meetings could spark something. 29:52. Exquisite. Something profound. 29:54. It isn't solely the monumental acts or the significant choices that matter. 29:59. In those fleeting, quiet moments, in shared silences, in the gentle honesty of a gaze. 30:04. In the warmth of presence without expectation, something lasting takes root. 30:08. The seeds of change are rarely loud. They arrive softly. 30:12. Settling into the spaces where healing begins. 30:15. Samuel and I had not planned this journey. 30:17. And yet it had unfolded with the grace of something inevitable. 30:21. What began in grief and distance had become a passage toward clarity. 30:25. Toward peace, and perhaps even toward something like love. 30:29. Not the love of stories or sweeping declarations. 30:32. But the kind built quietly, patient, enduring, real. 30:36. And as the night settled in and stars blinked into view. 30:39. I no longer feared what lay ahead. 30:42. For the first time in a long while, I felt whole. 30:46. Not because everything was resolved. 30:48. But because I had learned to carry the past with grace. 30:51. And to step into the future, unburdened, open and free.